Section 11 of The Education of a Christian Prince by Desiderius Erasmus. On beginning of war. Although a prince ought nowhere to be precipitate in his plans, there is no place for him to be more deliberate and circumspect than in the matter of going to war. Some evils come from one source and others from another, but from war comes the shipwreck of all that is good, and from it the sea of calamities pours out. Then too no other misfortune clings so steadfastly. War is sown from war. From the smallest comes the greatest, from one comes two, from a jesting one comes a fierce and bloody one, and the plague arising in one place spreads to the nearest peoples and is even carried to the most distant places. A good prince should never go to war at all unless after trying every other means he cannot possibly avoid it. If we were of this mind, there would be hardly no war. Finally, if so ruinous an occurrence cannot be avoided, then the prince's main care should be to wage the war with as little calamity to his own people, and as little shedding of Christian blood as may be, and to conclude the struggle as soon as possible. The real Christian prince will first weigh the great difference between man, who is an animal born for peace, and goodwill, and beasts and monsters, who are born to predatory war. He will weigh also the difference between men and Christian men. Then let him think over how earnestly peace is to be sought, and how honourable and wholesome it is. On the other hand, let him consider how disastrous and criminal an affair war is, and what a host of all evils it carries in its wake, even if it is the most justifiable war, if there really is any war which can be just. Lastly, when the prince has put away all personal feelings, let him make a rational estimate long enough to reckon what the war will cost, and whether the final end to be gained is worth that much, even if victory is certain, victory which does not always happen to favour the best causes. Weigh the worries, the expenditures, the trials, the long wearisome preparation, the barbaric flux of men in the last stages of depravity must be got together, and while you wish to appear more generous in favour than the other prince, in addition to paying out money, you must coax and humour the mercenary soldiers, who are absolutely the most abject and execrable type of human being. Nothing is dearer to a good prince than to have the best possible subjects. But what greater or more ready ruin to moral character is there than war? There is nothing more to the wish of the prince than to see his people safe and prospering in every way. But while he is learning to campaign, he is compelled to expose his young men to so many dangers, and often in a single hour to make many an orphan, widow, childless, old man, beggar, and unhappy wretch. The wisdom of princes will be too costly for the world if they persist in learning from experience how dreadful war is, so that when they are old men they may say, "I did not believe that war was so utterly destructive." But, and I call God to the witness, with what countless afflictions on the whole world have you learned that idea? The prince will understand some day that it was useless to extend the territory of his kingdom, and that what in the beginning seemed a gain was in reality tremendous loss. But in the meantime a great many thousands of men have been killed or impoverished. These things should better be learned from books, from the stories of old men, from the tribulations of neighbours. For many years this or that prince has been fighting on for such and such a kingdom. How much more is his loss than his gain? Let the good prince establish matters of the sort that will be of lasting worth. Those things which are begun out of a fancy are to our liking while the fancy lasts, but things which are based on judgment, and which delight the young man, will also afford pleasure to the old man. Nowhere is this truth more to be observed than in the beginning of war. Plato calls it sedition, not war, when Greeks war with Greeks, and if this should happen, he bids them fight with every restraint. What term should we apply then when Christians engage in battle with Christians, since they are united by so many bonds to each other? What shall we say when on account of a mere title, on account of a personal grievance, on account of a stupid and youthful ambition, a war is waged with every cruelty and carried on for many years? Some princes deceive themselves that any war is certainly a just one, and that they have a just cause for going to war. We will not attempt to discuss whether war is even just, but who does not think his own cause just? Among such great and changing vicissitudes of human events, among so many treaties and agreements which are now entered into, now rescinded, who can lack a pretext, if there is any real excuse for going to war? But the pontifical laws do not disapprove all war. Augustine approves of it in some instances, and St. Bernard praises some soldiers. But Christ himself and Peter and Paul everywhere teach the opposite. Why is their authority less with us than that of Augustine or Bernard? Augustine in one or two places does not disapprove of war, but the whole philosophy of Christ teaches against it. There is no place in which the apostles do not condemn it, and in how many places do those very holy fathers by whom, to the satisfaction of some, war has even been approved in one or two places, condemn and abhor it? Why do we slur over all these matters and fasten upon that which helps us sin? Finally, if any one will investigate the matter more carefully, he will find that no one has approved the kind of wars in which we are now commonly involved. Certain arts are not countenanced by the laws on the ground that they are too closely allied to imposture and are too frequently practiced by deceit, for example, astrology and the so-called alchemy, even if someone happens to be employing them for an honorable purpose. This restriction will be made with far more justice in the case of wars, for even if there are some which might be called just, yet as human affairs are now, I know not whether there could be found any of this sort, that is, the motive for which was not ambition, wrath, ferocity, lust, or greed. It too often happens that nobles, who are more lavish than their private means allow, when the opportunity is presented, stir up war in order to replenish their resources at home, even by the plunder of their peoples. It happens sometimes that princes enter into mutual agreements and carry on a war on trumped-up ground so as to reduce still more the power of the people and secure their own positions through disaster to their subjects. Wherefore the good Christian prince should hold under suspicion every war, no matter how just. People may lay down the doctrine that your rights must not be forsaken. In the first place, those rights are connected to a large extent with the private affairs of the prince, if he has acquired them through alliances. How unfair it would be to maintain them at the expense of such great suffering to the people, and while you are seeking some addition or other to your power, to plunder the whole kingdom and to plunge it into deadliest turmoil. If one prince offends another on some trivial matter, probably a personal one such as marriage, alliance, or other like affair, what concern is this to the people as a whole? A good prince measures everything by the advantage of his people, otherwise he is not even a prince. He does not have the same right over men as over animals. A large part of the ruling authority is in the consent of the people, which is a factor that first created kings. If a disagreement arises between princes, why not go to arbiters? There are plenty of bishops, abbots, and learned men or reliable magistrates by whose judgment the matter could better be settled than by such slaughter, despoliation, and calamity to the world. The Christian prince should first question his own right, and then, if it is established without a doubt, he should carefully consider whether it should be maintained by means of catastrophes to the whole world. Those who are wise sometimes prefer to lose a thing rather than to gain it, because they realize that it will be less costly. Caesar, I think, would prefer to give up his rights rather than seek to attain the old monarchy, and that right which the letter of the jurisconsults conferred on him. But what will be safe, they say, if no one maintains his rights? Let the prince insist by all means if there is any advantage to the state, only do not let the right of the prince bear too hard on his subjects. But what is safe anywhere while everyone is maintaining his rights to the last ditch? We see wars arise from wars, wars following wars, and no end or limit to the upheaval. It is certainly obvious that nothing is accomplished by these means. Therefore, other remedies should be given a trial. Not even between the best of friends will relations remain permanently harmonious unless sometimes one gives in to the other. A husband often takes some concession to his wife so as not to break their harmony. What does war cause but war? Courtesy, on the other hand, calls forth courtesy, and fairness, fairness. The fact that he can see from the countless calamities which war always carries in its wake, that the greatest hardships fall on those to whom the war means nothing, and who are in no way deserving of these catastrophes, will have an effect on the devoted and merciful prince. After the prince has reckoned and added up the total of all catastrophes which shall come to the world, if that could ever be done, then he should think over in his own mind, shall I, one person, be the cause of so many calamities? Shall I alone be charged with such an outpouring of human blood, with causing so many widows, with filling so many homes with lamentation and mourning, with robbing so many old men of their sons, with impoverishing so many who do not deserve such a fate, and with such utter destruction of morals, laws, and practical religion? Must I account for all these things before Christ? The prince cannot punish his enemy unless he first brings hostile activities upon his own subjects. He must fleece his people, and he must receive into his realm the soldier who has been called ruthless and not without justification by Virgil. He must cut off his subjects from those districts which they formerly enjoyed for their own advantage, or else the reverse, he must shut up his subjects in order to hem in the enemy. And it frequently happens that we inflict worse suffering upon our own people than upon the enemy. It is more difficult as well as more desirable to build a fine city than to destroy it. But we see flourishing cities which are established by inexperienced and common people demolished by the wrath of princes. Very often we destroy a town with greater labor and expense than that which we could build a new one, and we carry on war at such great expense, such loss, such zeal and pains, that peace could be maintained at 1/10 of these costs. Let the good prince always lean toward that glory which is not steeped in blood, nor linked with the misfortune of another. In war, however, unfortunately turns out, the good fortune of one is always the ruin of the other. Many a time, too, the victor weeps over a victory bought too dearly. If you are not moved by devotion nor by the calamity of the world, surely you will be stirred by the honor of the term Christian. What do we think the Turks and Saracens are saying about us when they see that for century after century there has been no harmony between Christian princes, that no treaties have secured peace, that there has been no end to bloodshed, and that there has been less disorder among the heathen than among those who profess the most complete accord in following the teachings of Christ? How fleeting, short, and delicate is the life of man, and how exposed to calamities, with so many diseases and accidents which are continually happening, such as a falling of buildings, shipwrecks, earthquakes, and lightning. There is no need then of wars to stir up misfortunes, and more calamities come from that source than from all else. It was the duty of the preachers to have uprooted completely the ideas of discord from the hearts of the common people. But now practically every Angle hates the Gaul, and every Gaul the Angle for no other reason that he is an Angle. The Irishman, just because he is an Irishman, hates the Briton, and the Italian hates the German, the Swabian the Swiss, and so on throughout the list. District hates district, the city hates city. Why do these stupid names do more to divide us than the common name of Christ does to unite us? Although we may grant some war to be just, yet, since we see that all men go mad over this scourge, it is a part of wise priests to deflect the minds of commoners and princes into different channels. Now we see them often as the very firebrands of war. The bishops are not ashamed to go about in the camp, and there is the cross, and there is the body of Christ, and they mix his heavenly sacraments with things that are more than Tartarian, and in such bloody discord produces symbols of the greatest charity. What is more ridiculous? Christ is in both camps, as if he were fighting against himself. It was not enough that war was tolerated among Christians, it must also be given the place of highest honor. If the whole teachings of Christ do not everywhere inveigh against war, if a single instance of specific commendation of war can be brought forth in its favor, let us Christians fight. The Hebrews were allowed to engage in war, but only by consent of God. Our oracle, which we hear steadily in the Gospels, restrains us from war, and yet we wage war more madly than they. David was most pleasing to God for various good qualities, and yet he forbade his temple to be built by him on one ground, that he was tainted with blood, that is, he was a warrior. He chose the peaceful Solomon for this task. If these things were done among the Jews, what should be done among us Christians? They had a shadow of Solomon, we have the real Solomon, the Prince of Peace, Christ, who conciliates all things in heaven and earth. Not even against the Turks do I believe we should rashly go to war, first reflecting in my own mind that the kingdom of Christ was created, spread out and firmly established by far different means. Perchance, then, it is not right that it should be maintained by means differing from those by which it was created and extended. We see how many times under pretext of war of this kind the Christian people have been plundered and nothing else has been accomplished. Now, if the matter has to do with faith, that has been increased and made famous by the suffering of martyrs and not by forces of soldiery. But if it is for ruling power, wealth, and possessions, we must continuously be on guard lest the cause have too little of Christianity in it. But on the contrary, to judge from some who are conducting wars of this kind, it may more readily happen that we degenerate into Turks than that they become Christians through our efforts. First, let us see that we ourselves are genuine Christians, and then, if it seems best, let us attack the Turks. We have written elsewhere more extensively on the evils of war, and should not repeat here. I will only urge princes of Christian faith to put aside all feigned excuses and all false pretexts, and with wholehearted seriousness to work for the ending of that madness for war which has persisted so long and disgracefully among Christians, that among those whom so many ties unite there may arise a peace and concord. Let them develop their genius to this end, and for this let them show their strength, combine their plans, and strain every nerve. Whoever desires to appear great, let him prove himself great in this way. If anyone accomplishes this, he will have done a deed far more magnificent than if he had subdued the whole Africa by arms. It would not be so difficult to do, if everyone would cease to favor his own cause, if we could set aside all personal feelings and carry out the common aim, if Christ, not the world, was in our plans. Now, while everyone is looking out of his own interests, while popes and bishops are deeply concerned over power and wealth, while princes are driven headlong by ambition or anger, while all follow after them for the sake of their own gain, it is not surprising that we run straight into a whirlwind of affairs under the guidance of folly. But if, after common counsel, we should carry out our common task, even those things which are purely personal to each one would be more prosperous. Now, even that for which alone we are fighting is lost. I have no doubt, most illustrious princes, that you are of this mind, for you are born in that atmosphere and have been trained by the best and most honourable men along these lines. For the rest, I pray that Christ, who is all good and supreme, may continue to bless your worthy efforts. He gave you a kingdom untainted by blood. He would have it always so. He rejoices to be called the Prince of Peace. May you do the same, that by your goodness and your wisdom at last there may be a respite from the maddest of mad wars. The memory of the misfortunes we have passed through will also commend peace to us, and the calamities of earlier times will render twofold the favour of your kindness.